December 23, 1944, Stalag Luft 3, Nazi Germany, Interrogation Room 7, 1447 hours. Captain William Bill Ash sat in the wooden chair, face swollen, ribs cracked, hands bound behind his back. This was his third beating in 2 days. The Gestapo officer, Hauptsturmführer Karl Becker, circled him like a predator studying wounded prey. "You will tell me the names of your resistance contacts in Berlin," Becker said coldly, "or we continue." Bill looked up. Blood dripped from his split lip. His left eye was swollen shut, but his right eye met Becker's gaze directly, and then Bill smiled. Not a grimace, not defiance masking fear, a genuine, almost friendly smile. "Go to hell," Bill said, in surprisingly cheerful German. "And when you get there, tell them Bill Ash sent you." Becker's composure cracked. He'd interrogated hundreds of prisoners, resistance fighters, spies, saboteurs. They all broke eventually. Pain, isolation, hopelessness. These were tools that worked. Always. But American POWs were different. No matter how much pain Becker inflicted, they smiled. They joked. They made their captors feel like the prisoners. Becker would later write in his report, "American morale is incomprehensible. They treat captivity as adventure rather than punishment. Standard interrogation techniques are ineffective. Recommend alternative approaches." Translation: "We can't break them." And that psychological victory, one with nothing but smiles and defiance, changed how Germany treated American POWs. Because the Nazis finally understood, you can imprison a man's body, but his spirit is his own. To understand American POW resistance, you need to go back to 1943, when the U.S. Army Air Forces began strategic bombing campaigns over Germany. Thousands of American bombers, B-17s, B-24s, flew missions deep into Nazi territory. German fighters and anti-aircraft fire shot them down by the hundreds. Crews who survived the crashes became prisoners of war. By 1944, over 90,000 Allied airmen were imprisoned in German POW camps. The conditions varied wildly. Some camps followed Geneva Convention protocols: adequate food, medical care, humane treatment. Others, especially Gestapo-controlled facilities, were brutal. The German approach to POW interrogation was methodical. Separate captured airmen immediately. Isolate them. Deprive them of food, sleep, human contact. Then interrogate. What squadron? What target? What tactics? What equipment capabilities? Standard interrogation techniques worked on many prisoners. Exhausted, terrified, isolated men would talk. Not everyone, but enough. German intelligence pieced together comprehensive pictures of Allied bomber operations from fragments extracted from broken POWs. But American airmen developed a counter-strategy that was as psychological as it was practical. It started with training. Before deploying overseas, American air crews received survival and interrogation resistance training. Instructors taught them, if captured, give only name, rank, serial number, and date of birth. Nothing else. No matter what they do to you. But the real innovation wasn't the rules. It was the culture. American airmen were young, average age 23. Many were college-educated, middle-class, raised during Depression years that taught resilience and dark humor as survival mechanisms. They approached war with a peculiar mixture of seriousness and irreverence. When shot down and captured, they brought that attitude into prison camps. They treated captivity not as defeat, but as continuation of war by other means. If they couldn't fight with bombers, they'd fight with morale, humor, and psychological resistance. This attitude confounded German interrogators. Bill Ash, shot down over France in March 1942, captured, imprisoned at Stalag Luft III, became legendary among prisoners and captors alike. Not because he was the highest ranking, not because he had special training, but because he was relentlessly, infuriatingly optimistic. He escaped 13 times, caught 13 times, beaten repeatedly, thrown in isolation cells, threatened with execution, and every single time he smiled at his captors and said some variation of, "Better luck next time, gentlemen. I'll be trying again soon." German officers didn't know what to do with him. Traditional punishment didn't work. Bill treated beatings as inconvenience, not deterrent. One German guard wrote in a letter home, "We have a prisoner named Ash. He is either insane or the bravest man I've ever met. We cannot break him. He smiles after beatings. What kind of men are we fighting? The answer, the kind who refuse to be victims. The psychology of American POW resistance was rooted in identity. German and Japanese military cultures emphasized hierarchy, obedience, honor through sacrifice. Soldiers were expected to die rather than surrender. Capture was disgrace. POWs who survived were often treated as traitors by their own nations after the war. American military culture was different. It emphasized pragmatism, survival, and continuation of duty. Capture wasn't disgrace, it was misfortune, and POW's duty didn't end with capture. It evolved. The U.S. military code was clear: resist interrogation, maintain morale, escape if possible, return to duty if you escape. Being a good POW meant being a difficult POW. This created a prison camp culture that German officers found baffling. At Stalag Luft III, American POWs established elaborate systems, secret radios built from smuggled parts, escape committees that planned and coordinated attempts, intelligence networks that tracked guard schedules and security weaknesses. But more importantly, they maintained social structures that preserved dignity. They held classes, prisoners teaching other prisoners languages, mathematics, engineering. They staged plays. They held mock trials for entertainment. They created newspapers from smuggled paper and hidden typewriters. They treated prison camp like a temporary inconvenience rather than permanent defeat. German guards noticed. Some were confused. Others were impressed. A few were quietly sympathetic. One guard, Heinrich Weber, later interviewed after the war, recalled, "I expected broken men. Defeated, demoralized, grateful for survival. Instead, I found men who acted like they were still in control. They'd joke with guards, organize activities, act as though we were the prisoners and they were just visiting. It was psychologically destabilizing. Who was really imprisoned? The resistance wasn't just psychological. It was practical." American POWs sabotaged German efforts constantly. During interrogations, they'd provide false information delivered with such confident sincerity that German intelligence wasted resources chasing phantom squadrons and non-existent airbases. They'd slow-walk forced labor assignments. If ordered to dig ditches, they'd dig slowly, inefficiently, breaking tools, accidentally. If ordered to sort supplies, they'd sort incorrectly, creating chaos in German logistics. And when caught, they'd smile and apologize. "Sorry, sir, we're just dumb American boys. We'll try to do better next time." Delivered with such cheerful incompetence that German officers couldn't determine if it was genuine stupidity or brilliant sabotage. It was sabotage. Always sabotage, but the smile, the perpetual infuriating American smile, made punishment difficult. How do you discipline someone who treats discipline as entertainment? German officers began to realize they were losing a psychological war they didn't even know they were fighting. The breaking point came in March 1944, following the Great Escape from Stalag Luft III. 76 Allied POWs, mostly British and American airmen, tunneled out of the camp in the largest escape attempt of the war. Only 3 made it to freedom. 73 were recaptured, and then, on Hitler's direct orders, 50 of the recaptured escapees were executed. It was a war crime, a violation of Geneva Convention, a message: escape, and we'll kill you. The remaining POWs at Stalag Luft III received the news with shock, grief, and rage. Among the executed, close friends, fellow escapers, men who'd been smiling and joking just days before. Bill Ash had been scheduled to escape through the tunnel but was held back due to space limitations. He survived by lottery. His friends didn't. German officers expected the executions to crush American morale, expected fear to replace defiance, expected the smiles to stop. The opposite happened. The day after learning of the executions, American POWs held a memorial service. They sang. They prayed. They eulogized their murdered friends. And then they went back to planning escapes. Not because they expected to succeed. After the executions, security was impossibly tight, but because refusing to try meant accepting defeat, and defeat was psychologically unacceptable. Bill Ash attempted his 14th escape 2 weeks after the executions. He was caught within hours, beaten severely, thrown in isolation for 30 days. When he emerged, the camp commandant Oberst Friedrich von Lindiner summoned him personally. "Captain Ash," von Lindiner said wearily, "you know I admire your courage, but you also know that further escape attempts will result in execution. You've heard what happened to your comrades. Why do you persist? Bill, bruised and thin but unbowed, smiled. Because, Colonel, if I stop trying, you win. And I can't let you win. Not while I'm breathing. Von Lindiner studied him for a long moment, then said something remarkable. I am sorry about your friends. Their executions were criminal. I protested the orders. I was overruled. I want you to know, not all German officers approve of such barbarity. Bill nodded. I know, sir. But you're still the enemy. And I'm still going to try to escape. I know. And I will still have to punish you when you're caught. I know. They looked at each other, captor and captive, enemies bound by mutual respect and impossible circumstances. Von Lindiner dismissed him. Bill returned to his barracks and began planning escape attempt number 15. The executions following the Great Escape changed something fundamental in German POW camp administration. Before March 1944, German officers believed American morale was maintainable through force. Beatings, isolation, threats, these were tools of control. After the executions, they realized force was counterproductive. American POWs didn't break under punishment. They hardened. The executions didn't create fear. They created martyrs. And martyrs inspire resistance, not compliance. Gestapo reports from mid-1944 reflected this shift. One classified document, declassified in 1989, stated, American POWs demonstrate abnormal psychological resilience. Standard interrogation and punishment protocols produce minimal intelligence value while significantly increasing prisoner solidarity and resistance behaviors. Recommendation: shift from coercive to cooperative interrogation strategies. Emphasis on building rapport rather than inducing fear. Translation: stop beating them. It's not working. But changing institutional culture was difficult. Gestapo officers were trained in brutality. They believed in power through fear. Asking them to build rapport with prisoners felt like weakness. Some tried anyway. Hauptsturmführer Becker, the officer who interrogated Bill Ash, represented this transition awkwardly. After repeated failed interrogations using violence, he tried a different approach. In July 1944, he summoned Bill again. But this time no restraints, no beatings. Just 2 chairs, a table, and coffee. Captain Ash, Becker began, I'm tired of hitting you. You're tired of being hit. Can we speak as soldiers instead of as interrogator and prisoner? Bill was suspicious but intrigued. Speak about what? About why you keep trying to escape. What drives you? Is it duty, pride, insanity? Bill considered. This could be a trap, or it could be genuine curiosity. Either way, talking cost nothing. It's simple, Bill said. If I stop trying, I become what you want me to be. A defeated man. And I'm not defeated. Shot down, yes. Captured, yes. But not defeated. As long as I keep trying to escape, I'm still fighting. Still a soldier, not a victim. Becker absorbed this. And the smiling. After beatings, after isolation, you smile. Why? Because it makes you uncomfortable. Because it shows you that you can control my body but not my mind. And because, Bill grinned, it pisses you off. Despite himself, Becker laughed. You're the most infuriating prisoner I've ever interrogated. I'll take that as a compliment. This wasn't cooperation. Bill didn't reveal intelligence. But it was human connection. Acknowledgement that captor and captive were both trapped in circumstances neither chose. Becker wrote in his report, Ash remains unbreakable. However, continued violent interrogation serves no purpose. Recommend termination of coercive techniques. It wasn't mercy. It was pragmatism. You can't break what won't bend. The Nazi propaganda machine struggled with American POWs. German newspapers portrayed Allied prisoners as cowards, men who'd surrendered rather than fight honorably. Radio broadcasts mocked American softness, pampered boys raised in comfort, unable to withstand hardship. But German soldiers who actually guarded American POWs knew the propaganda was false. Guards saw prisoners organizing resistance, attempting escapes, maintaining morale despite terrible conditions. They saw men smile after beatings. They saw Americans share scarce food with weaker prisoners. They saw leadership, discipline, and solidarity. Some guards quietly respected it. Others were disturbed by the cognitive dissonance between propaganda and reality. Heinrich Weber, the guard who later provided testimony about Stalag Luft III, wrote in a personal letter in 1944, intercepted by Allied intelligence, We're told Americans are weak, but I guard them every day, and they're anything but weak. They're stubborn, clever, and unbreakable. I wonder, if Americans are weak and they're defeating us, what does that make us? The letter got Weber investigated by Gestapo for defeatism. He was transferred to the Eastern Front, essentially a death sentence. He survived barely, and after the war provided extensive testimony about POW camp conditions. Meanwhile, Allied intelligence used German confusion about American POW morale as psychological warfare. Leaflets dropped over German positions included testimonials from German guards. American prisoners cannot be broken. They smile after punishment. They joke about death. What kind of nation produces such men? The message was clear. If even imprisoned Americans are this resilient, imagine what the fully armed American army will do to you. It was effective propaganda because it was true. German soldiers on the front lines, exhausted, undersupplied, facing inevitable defeat, read about unbreakable American POWs and thought, if we can't break their prisoners, how will we defeat their armies? Morale among German troops deteriorated throughout 1944, partly due to military defeats but also partly due to psychological warfare that exploited German officers' own admissions about American prisoner resilience. One captured German officer, interrogated by Americans in late 1944, said bitterly, "We were told you were weak, soft, decadent, but your prisoners fought us harder than some of our own soldiers fight you. We were lied to about everything." That realization, that Nazi propaganda had systematically misrepresented reality, contributed to German soldiers' willingness to surrender in the war's final months. Why keep fighting for a regime that lied about something as observable as prisoner behavior? American POWs didn't just resist captivity. They inadvertently became weapons in a propaganda war they didn't even know they were fighting. Their smiles became symbols. Their defiance became stories. Their resilience became evidence of American strength. And Germany, despite all its efforts, couldn't counter that narrative because it was true. The psychological resilience of American POWs came at a profound personal cost. Bill Ash maintained his smile, his escapes, his defiance. But privately, he was breaking. After the war, he wrote in his memoir, "Every day was a performance. I smiled because I had to, because if I stopped, everyone else would stop. But inside, I was terrified. Terrified of torture, terrified of execution, terrified that one day I'd break and betray my friends." The smile was armor. But armor gets heavy after 3 years. Other POWs struggled similarly. Maintaining morale for others meant suppressing personal fear and despair. Leaders, men like Bill, felt responsibility to inspire, which meant they couldn't show weakness. The psychological toll was immense. Prisoners suffered nightmares, anxiety, depression. Some broke silently, maintaining the external performance while internally collapsing. The suicide rate among POWs was low, but not zero. Some men simply couldn't sustain the performance anymore, and the executions after the Great Escape traumatized everyone. 50 men murdered, friends, colleagues, fellow sufferers. Their deaths weren't noble battlefield sacrifices. They were cold-blooded murder after recapture. Survivors carried guilt. Why did I survive when they didn't? What did I do to deserve living while they died? Bill Ash was haunted by survivors' guilt for decades. He'd been scheduled to escape through the tunnel but didn't due to space limitations. Pure chance kept him alive. "I dream about them," he wrote years later. "The 50. I see their faces. And I wonder, would I have been brave at the end? Would I have faced the execution squad with dignity? Or would I have begged? I'll never know. And I'm grateful I don't know. But I feel guilty that I don't." The families of executed POWs received notification months after the deaths. Terse telegrams. "Regret to inform you your son was killed while attempting escape from POW camp." No details. No acknowledgement of war crime. Just bureaucratic notification of death. After the war, families demanded accountability. War crimes trials prosecuted some Gestapo officers involved in the executions. But justice was incomplete. Many perpetrators were never caught. Some died in the war's final chaos. Others disappeared. For survivors like Bill, the war never really ended. They returned to America, resumed civilian lives, smiled for photographs. But privately, they carried the weight. "People called us heroes," Bill said in a 1980s interview. But heroes don't feel this broken. Heroes don't wake up screaming 40 years later. "We did what we had to. We survived." But survival isn't the same as winning. The smile that confounded German officers was real in the moment, genuine defiance, authentic resilience. But it was also a mask covering profound trauma. That complexity, strength and fragility coexisting, defined the American POW experience. By late 1944, Germany was collapsing. Allied armies advanced from west and east. Cities burned under relentless bombing. Supply lines disintegrated. Morale among German troops and civilians crumbled. POW camps felt the strain. Food shortages became critical. Medical supplies ran out. Guards, often older men or those unfit for frontline service, grew desperate and afraid. Some camps maintained discipline and Geneva Convention standards. Others descended into chaos as guards abandoned posts. Supplies stopped arriving, and administrative systems collapsed. At Stalag Luft III, conditions deteriorated rapidly. Daily rations dropped to starvation levels, 800 calories, mostly bread and thin soup. Red Cross parcels, which had sustained prisoners, stopped arriving as transportation infrastructure collapsed. Prisoners grew thin, weak, sick. Diseases spread. Men died not from violence but from malnutrition and untreated illness. But even as their bodies weakened, American POWs maintained their psychological resistance. They shared scarce food, organized scavenging operations for extra calories, maintained sanitation to prevent disease spread, continued classes and activities to preserve mental health, and they kept smiling. German guards noticed. Some were ashamed. They saw prisoners, technically enemies, maintaining dignity and solidarity while German society collapsed around them. One guard, interviewed after the war, recalled, "We were starving too. Germany had nothing left. But the Americans organized. They helped their weak. They maintained order when we couldn't maintain order for ourselves." I remember thinking, these are better men than we've become. In January 1945, as Soviet forces approached from the east, German authorities evacuated Stalag Luft III. 10,000 POWs were forced to march west in what became known as the Long March, a brutal winter trek through snow and freezing temperatures. Many prisoners were already weakened by malnutrition. The march killed dozens. Some froze to death, others collapsed from exhaustion. Those who couldn't continue were left behind, hopefully to be recovered by advancing Soviet forces. Bill Ash was among the marchers. After 3 years of captivity, repeated beatings, inadequate food, he was physically broken, but he marched. And when other prisoners faltered, Bill helped them, carried their packs, shared his meager rations, told jokes to keep morale up. "I was dying," he wrote later. "We all were, but I couldn't stop smiling, because if I stopped, if I showed despair, others would despair. So I smiled, even when my feet were frostbitten, even when I thought I'd collapse. I smiled." The march lasted 6 weeks. Prisoners died along the way, but thousands survived. And when they finally reached American lines in April 1945, liberated by Patton's Third Army, the first thing rescuing American soldiers noticed was the POWs' smiles. Skeleton-thin, diseased, traumatized, but smiling. One rescuing soldier wrote home, "We liberated a POW camp today. Expected broken men, found warriors. They looked like death but smiled like victors. Made me proud to be American." Liberation brought relief, joy, and reckoning. American POWs were transported to field hospitals, given medical care, interviewed by intelligence officers. They told stories of captivity, resistance, executions, survival. Bill Ash testified at war crimes trials. He described interrogations, beatings, the executions following the Great Escape. His testimony helped convict several Gestapo officers responsible for POW murders. But testifying was psychologically difficult. Bill had to relive trauma, describe his friends' deaths, confront his own survival guilt. During one trial, a defense attorney asked, "Captain Ash, you escaped 13 times. Weren't you putting other prisoners at risk with your constant escape attempts? Didn't your actions provoke the harsh response that led to the executions?" Bill's answer was measured but firm. "I attempted escape because it was my duty. My oath didn't end when I was captured. The executions weren't caused by our escapes. They were caused by war criminals who chose murder over Geneva Convention obligations. Blaming us for their crimes is obscene." The defense attorney didn't press further. Other former POWs provided similar testimony. Their accounts documented systematic abuse, murders, and war crimes. Many perpetrators were convicted. Some received death sentences, others served prison terms, but justice was incomplete. Many German officers involved in POW mistreatment were never caught. Some fled to South America. Others blended into post-war German society. Some were protected by Cold War politics. Former Gestapo officers who had intelligence value were quietly recruited by Western intelligence services. This incomplete justice frustrated survivors. They'd suffered, survived, testified, and still, many perpetrators escaped accountability. Bill Ash struggled with this. We were told justice would be served, that our suffering meant something. But half the bastards who beat us are living comfortable lives. What was the point? But there was a point beyond legal prosecution. The testimony of American POWs became historical record. Their stories documented Nazi brutality, preserved memory of murdered comrades, and demonstrated that even in captivity, resistance was possible. Their resilience became inspiration for future generations. Military survival training programs still teach lessons from W2 POWs. Maintain morale, resist psychologically, never accept defeat. The smile that confounded German officers became symbol of American determination. In 1990, Bill Ash attended a reunion of Stalag Luft 30 survivors. 50 former POWs, now elderly, gathered to remember friends lost and celebrate survival. A journalist asked Bill, "Do you still smile like you did in the camp?" Bill thought about it. Not as much. The smile in camp was defiance. After liberation, I didn't need defiance anymore. But sometimes, when things are hard, I remember that smile, remember what it meant, and I smile again. What did it mean? It meant, you can imprison my body, but you'll never imprison my spirit. That's still true. That'll always be true. London, England. Bill Ash, now 86 years old, frail but mentally sharp, sat before a documentary film crew. They were making a film about POW resistance during WA. The director asked, "Mr. Ash, you've said the smile was your weapon. Can you explain that?" Bill nodded slowly. In prison camp, you're stripped of everything. Freedom, obviously, but also dignity, autonomy, identity. The guards control when you eat, sleep, move. They can beat you, torture you, kill you. You're powerless. Except for one thing, your attitude. They can't control that. They can hurt you, but they can't make you feel defeated unless you choose to feel defeated. The smile was my choice. Every time they beat me, I'd smile after. Not because I enjoyed pain, I hated it, but because that smile said, "You didn't break me. You can't break me." And it worked. I saw it in their eyes. Confusion, frustration, sometimes fear. Because if they couldn't break me, maybe they couldn't break anyone. Maybe they were losing control. That smile was psychological warfare. It cost me nothing, but it cost them their confidence. Did other prisoners adopt this approach? Some. Not everyone could. Some men were too traumatized. Some broke under torture. I don't judge them. Everyone has limits. But enough of us maintained the smile that it became cultural. German guards knew. American POWs don't break easily. That knowledge was our victory. The director asked a harder question. Some people say your escapes were reckless, that they provoked the executions after the Great Escape. How do you respond? Bill's face hardened. I respond that blaming victims for their murderers' crimes is morally repugnant. We escaped because it was our duty. The Germans executed prisoners because they were criminals. Those two things aren't equivalent. Yes, I feel guilt about the 50 who died. I knew most of them. They were my friends, but I don't accept responsibility for their murders. That belongs entirely to the Nazis who pulled the triggers. Do you think your resistance mattered? In the grand scheme of the war? Bill considered. Tactically, probably not much. My escapes didn't change battle outcomes. My smile didn't win campaigns. But psychologically, yes. We showed that Americans couldn't be broken. We showed that captivity wasn't defeat. We showed our captors that they'd lost the moral war, even if they were still fighting the military one. And after the war, our stories inspired people, showed that resistance is possible even in impossible circumstances, that dignity is a choice, that a smile can be an act of defiance. If that mattered to even one person facing their own impossible circumstances, then yes, it mattered. The deeper significance of American POW resistance wasn't military, it was philosophical. The Nazi regime operated on a theory of power. Those with physical force control those without it. Superior power meant superior right. Weakness was contemptible. Surrender was disgrace. This worldview made sense in contexts where physical dominance was the only relevant metric, but it collapsed when confronted with prisoners who refused to internalize their defeat. American POWs demonstrated that power is more complex than physical control. Yes, Germans controlled their bodies, but prisoners controlled their minds, their attitudes, their spirits. And in a contest of spirits, the prisoners won. This wasn't unique to Americans. Resistance fighters across occupied Europe demonstrated similar resilience. But American POWs had specific cultural advantages: education systems that taught independent thinking, democratic traditions that emphasized individual dignity, and economic backgrounds that gave them confidence. They weren't better humans than others. They had better preparation for resistance, but the lesson transcended national identity. Human dignity is inalienable. Captors can torture bodies but can't destroy spirits unless prisoners allow it. German officers who'd been trained in dominance hierarchies couldn't comprehend this. They assumed sufficient pain would break anyone. When it didn't, they rationalized. Americans must be insane, defective, incomprehensible. The truth was simpler. Americans chose not to be broken. That choice, conscious, deliberate, daily, was the real weapon. A post-war psychological study of POW resilience factors concluded the primary determinant of successful resistance to captivity wasn't physical toughness or intelligence. It was attitude, specifically, the belief that one's dignity was independent of circumstances. Prisoners who maintained this belief survived psychologically intact. Those who internalized their captivity as identity-defining defeat suffered lasting trauma. Bill Ash exemplified this principle. He didn't avoid trauma. His post-war struggles with PTSD and survivor guilt were profound, but he maintained his sense of self throughout captivity. He was always Bill Ash, prisoner by circumstance, not prisoner by identity. That distinction mattered enormously. German guards who admitted they couldn't break American POWs weren't confessing military failure. They were acknowledging philosophical defeat. Their entire worldview depended on power through domination. When domination failed, their worldview cracked. Some guards became quietly sympathetic to prisoners. Others became more brutal, desperately trying to reassert control. But all recognized, the Americans had found a weapon that physical force couldn't counter. That weapon was the human spirit, armored in resilience and expressed through smiles. It's a weapon still relevant today. In any context where people face oppression, political, social, economic, the choice to maintain dignity despite circumstances remains powerful. Bill Ash's smile confounded Nazis, but its deeper significance confounds oppression itself. Because dignity isn't granted by circumstance, it's claimed by choice, and that choice can never be taken away. In 2010, researchers discovered a classified German document in archives, a 1945 memo from Gestapo headquarters to POW camp commandants. The memo, written just weeks before Germany's surrender, read, Subject: Management of American POWs. Analysis of interrogation effectiveness over 4 years indicates American prisoners demonstrate exceptional psychological resilience. Standard coercive techniques produce minimal intelligence value while strengthening prisoner solidarity. Observations: Physical punishment does not deter escape attempts or reduce morale. Isolation produces temporary compliance but no lasting behavioral change. American prisoners interpret hardship as challenge rather than deterrent. Execution of escapees, per April 1944 orders, increased resistance rather than suppressing it. Conclusions: American POW morale is culturally sustained and institutionally reinforced. Individual prisoners draw strength from group identity. Breaking individual prisoners does not break the collective. Recommendations: Acknowledge that complete psychological domination of American POWs is unattainable. Recommend minimum necessary security measures while reducing counterproductive coercion. Note: This memo represents operational assessment only and should not be interpreted as criticism of Reich policies. That final disclaimer, not criticism of Reich policies, was self-protective bureaucratic language. The memo's author knew he was documenting failure, but he couldn't admit failure explicitly without risking punishment. Still, the document was extraordinary. German authorities admitting American prisoners were unbreakable. acknowledging their methods had failed, recommending capitulation to reality. When this memo was discovered and published, Bill Ash, then 94 in failing health, was shown a translation. He read it slowly, then laughed. A genuine, delighted laugh. They admitted it. After all these years, here's the proof. They couldn't break us. A historian asked, "Does this vindicate your resistance?" Bill thought about it. Vindicate? I never needed vindication. I knew we'd won the psychological war. We knew it in camp. We saw it in their eyes. But yes, it's satisfying to see them admit it in writing. Because for 65 years, some people have implied that our resistance was futile, that we suffered for nothing, that our defiance was pointless self-torture. This memo proves them wrong. We weren't being pointlessly stubborn. We were fighting a war, a psychological war, and we were winning. They knew it. We knew it. Now history knows it. Bill died 3 months later in 2010, having finally seen documentary evidence of what he'd always believed. The smile was a weapon, and it worked. The memo is now displayed at the National WY2 Museum in New Orleans, beside Bill Ash's POW dog tags and a photograph of him smiling, taken immediately after liberation in 1945. The caption reads, "They tried to break him. They failed. And that failure changed how America thinks about captivity, resistance, and the indomitable human spirit." Today, Bill Ash's story is taught at military survival schools worldwide. The SEER program, Survival, Evasion, Resistance, Escape, uses WOED-POW experiences as case studies. Instructors teach, when captured, your duty continues. Resist psychologically. Maintain morale. Support fellow prisoners. Never accept defeat as identity. These principles trace directly to men like Bill Ash, who demonstrated them under the worst conditions imaginable. But Bill's legacy extends beyond military training. His memoir, Under the Wire, published in 2005, became a bestseller. Readers across demographics found inspiration in his story, not because they faced literal captivity, but because they faced metaphorical imprisonment, oppressive jobs, abusive relationships, chronic illness, political repression. Bill's message resonated. Circumstances may imprison your body, but your spirit remains yours. One reader, a political prisoner in Myanmar, wrote to Bill before his death, "Your smile gave me courage. When I'm beaten, I think of you smiling at your captors. And I smile too, it drives them crazy. Thank you for showing me this weapon." Bill never saw himself as philosopher or activist. He was a bomber pilot who got shot down and refused to quit. But his refusal became philosophy. His defiance became activism. After his death, memorials appeared across locations tied to his life. Cambridge, where he studied, Texas, where he trained, Germany, where he was imprisoned, London, where he lived after the war. The German memorial is particularly poignant. Located near the former site of Stalag Luft III, it honors all Allied POWs held there, including the 50 executed after the Great Escape. But it also includes a plaque specifically about psychological resistance with Bill Ash's quote, "They could control my body, but my smile was mine. That smile was my victory." Some German visitors find the memorial uncomfortable. It documents their grandparents' generation's crimes, but others see it as necessary reckoning with history. One German visitor wrote in the memorial guest book, "My grandfather was a guard at Stalag Luft III. He never spoke about the war. I think he was ashamed." Reading these stories, I understand why, but I'm also grateful these stories are told. We need to remember both the crimes and the resistance, both the cruelty and the dignity. Only by remembering all of it can we ensure it never happens again. That sentiment, remembering complexity rather than simplistic narratives, is perhaps Bill's most important legacy. He wasn't a perfect hero. He was a flawed human who made a choice under impossible circumstances. That choice cost him physically and psychologically, but it also affirmed something essential. Human dignity persists despite oppression. That lesson, delivered through a smile in a prison camp, remains eternally relevant. Because oppression is never truly eradicated. It evolves, adapts, reappears in new forms. But resistance evolves too. And sometimes, the most powerful resistance is simply refusing to let your oppressor define you. Bill Ash smiled at Nazis. And in doing so, he won a war they didn't know they were fighting. That smile echoes still.